Okay, are we live? All right.
Yeah, we're good to get started.
Right. Hey, good afternoon. Welcome to the Metropolitan Washington Committee of the Montgomery County Delegation. Today is Thursday, December 17th. This is our pre-session work session. We have two bills on the agenda. And so this is a work and possible voting session. We will discuss the bills and come to consensus, vote out what we can, and if there are things that need more work, then perhaps we may need to meet another time before the delegation meets on January the 7th. So we're going to take the bills in reverse order. The first bill we'll take is MCPG 101-21. And because that's my bill, I'm going to hand the gavel over to the Vice Chair, Delegate Charkoudian.
Okay, great. Thanks. It's great to be the Vice Chair. Only having done this ever by Zoom, never. I'm not actually sure. Would you like to, I actually am not sure if you have amendments you want to present, but why don't I just ask you, Delegate Carr, if you'd like to say anything about this bill and the current status of it and what it is that you want us to consider today.
Okay, so MCPG 101-21, there are no amendments to the bill. It is identical to a bill that passed the House last year. It simply clarifies the process for submitting a complete application by a government agency to Park and Planning for a mandatory referral. Pretty straightforward. The vote was unanimous in the Montgomery County delegation last year, so I am asking for approval.
Okay, and is there anyone on the committee that has either questions or comments related to this bill?
I have a question, Madam Chair.
Yes, Delegate Lukey.
Thank you. Just to confirm, Delegate Carr, I looked last year and I thought I saw that the committee, this subcommittee had made some amendments to the bill before it went on to the full delegation. Is the version that was introduced this year reflective of the version that included those amendments?
Yes. This reflects the bill as it passed the House, which incorporates the amendments.
Great. I move favorable on the bill.
Second.
Second. Okay, all in favor, stick your thumb in the air. Opposed? Okay, the bill passes the committee unanimously. All right, well then I guess I'm going to hand it back to you, Chair Carr, for my bill, MCPG 100-21.
All right, thank you, Madam Vice Chair. So the final bill, second bill, MCPG 100-21. We had a hearing on this bill, and there's been some amendments that have been distributed and discussion on the bill. It was also heard, I believe, in the Prince George's County delegation. But Delegate Charkoudian, as the sponsor, why don't you walk us through the amendments or anything else you want to let us know about the bill? And we have WSSC folks on here as well that they can speak to it as well.
Okay, great, thank you. As a quick reminder, this bill did two things. One is that it required live streaming of WSSC Commission hearings, and the second is that it adjusted the statutory section related to the cap on the late fees to change it to a cap as opposed to a required amount. As you may recall from the hearing, there was a good bit of support for it, and there was also some concerns by WSSC. I've had multiple conversations with WSSC, and I think we're close to language that they can agree to, but there were a couple of areas where I actually was interested in sort of taking advantage of the work session context and letting the committee sort of weigh in. So I did have amendments that you may hopefully have access to, although there's a couple different versions and there's a WSSC version. So why don't I walk through where I think we are, and then folks can, does anyone have a question, I guess, before I, like broad question about it before I talk about the specific places with the amendments? Okay, so you may have the amendment that I had offered. So I would say that WSSC, and they can weigh in if this isn't correct, but the concern that they had was that if there was some kind of a technical problem with the mechanism through which they would either live stream or record either an audio or video meeting, that it would somehow nullify or void the decisions that were made in that meeting. So I had originally proposed various amendments that referenced that if there was a bona fide technical issue which prevented the meeting to be live streamed, then it didn't void the hearing, didn't void the decision making. WSSC has shared, I believe, with everybody here some additional language, and it was, I think they sent it to everybody with a, so it should look like, except as provided in paragraph 2 of the subsection, the commission shall make publicly available to its website, 1, live streaming a video of each portion of the meeting, 2, if the commission meets by telephone, live streaming of the audio. Does everybody have access to that, essentially WSSC's proposed amendments to the bill? So there was,
I don't
Rebecca
have
had sent it out to everyone's house account. So
the laptop account or the general house account?
Rebecca,
the general house account.
sorry, Mr. Chairman. Rebecca, maybe you can just drop it into the Google Drive real quick.
Yep.
That you sent the link
okay.
on.
The Google Drive.
So I think that we probably, I want you to be able to see the whole thing before we make a final decision, but I'll just say where I think that WSSC and I are still working on getting to consensus and would welcome folks' feedback is this question about how do we articulate in the bill that sort of a willful or decision made not to stream is against the spirit of the law that we're writing, whereas a technical problem doesn't violate it such that it would void a decision. And so the language that you'll see it in a moment when you're able to get their document, the language that WSSC had suggested was, after laying out that if they can't stream it, that they would record it and that the unedited archived video would be available. After sort of all of that, their language was, failure of the commission to meet the requirements of this subsection does not affect the validity of any action taken by the commission during the open portion of the meeting. The commission otherwise if the commission otherwise complies with Title III of the general provision of the Article of Code, that's Open Meeting Act, and B, the failure is not willful. That last piece was a new addition. I can put this in the chat. I'm not sure if that works, if people can see it, if they're watching online, but.
And that last sentence you said, that's your addition to their amendment?
No, that was their addition when I suggested that their amendment wasn't sufficient to meet my concerns. So this is now their final recommendation based on the conversations that we've been having.
Okay, but that one hasn't been distributed because we got a version from Guy yesterday, but does it reflect that piece?
Guy, did it reflect the final?
It should have that. That's under Amendment 2. It's 5B. It's the last statement on 5B. It's page 2 at the top, near the top, about the top third.
Okay, I see that. All right, great.
Okay. So that it was a later addition based on our conversation. So I guess my question to the committee is, as I value your opinions, if you all feel, especially many of you who have worked on open meeting issues and streaming and transparency issues, that this sufficiently covers the possibility that limits the ability to sort of choose not to stream, really limits it to technical things beyond the control of the commission, then I would be okay with it. But I'm interested in different perspectives on this because it's an area I'm not sure that this fully covers. Yeah.
All right, committee members, questions, thoughts? Are people, sponsor, if the committee is okay with the gist of this amendment as that's been drafted by WSSC, you would be okay with it. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, if the committee agrees that it really takes care of this issue of making it a technical failure that would have to be excused as opposed to a choice that would be excused.
Okay.
So simply saying failure of the commission to meet the requirements to me is not sufficient, but potentially adding the section about willful
Okay.
is sufficient. If others agree, then I can get this drafted as it currently is, which I think works for WSSC.
Okay. All right. So Amanda's raising her hand. Amanda, would you like to address the committee? Please go ahead.
Sure. I just wanted to let the committee know that this failure is not willful language, actually comes from the Open Meetings Act itself. And it comes from a judicial enforcement provision that says that if a court is going to void an action of a public body for a series of named Open Meetings Act violations, the court has to find that the public body willfully failed to comply. So I just wanted to let everybody know where I found that language and pull it over. So we have some parallels in the Open Meetings Act here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for that.
Chair Corman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So WSSC's concern is that failure to show on video will lead a judge to void an action, because there's a provision of the OMA that specifically allows the voiding of action if there's a violation of specific provisions of the OMA. Our other video streaming laws, as I understand them, don't have anything about this. They don't either provide or prevent a judge from voiding a provision based on not showing video. So I just want to make sure we're clear that this means pretty explicitly, if there is a willful failure to video, that action will likely be struck down by a judge because you've created here an obvious remedy, which is not the case with our IAC streaming, our State Board of Education meetings, our State Board of Election streaming, our Maryland Transportation Authority streaming, all those laws. It's extremely unlikely a judge would strike down an action, in my view anyway, for failing to stream because it's not contemplated by the statute.
Okay. Yes,
You've made it stronger, Amanda.
Okay.
Professor Khan.
I do that purposely. In my tenure as general counsel, we've seen some lawsuits here where part of what the plaintiff is alleging is something should be voided because there was some OMA problem. And for me, as defending WSSC, having this specific language allows us to point to that in any potential action. I get it, we're making it stronger, but it also protects us in a way as well. We would get that protection under the Open Meetings Act.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for working with the sponsor on the language.
All right. Other committee members, questions, thoughts? Delegate Lidke, you have a pensive look on your face.
No, I think it's reasonable language. I support the language.
Okay. Delegate Fraser Hidalgo, are you comfortable with this language that seems like the sponsor and both WSSC are comfortable with?
Yeah, it seems like all the lawyers in the room are okay with it. So yeah, I'm good with it. If it's good with the, yeah, I'm fine.
All right, well, we have one more lawyer to ask. Delegate Dumais, are you comfortable with this language?
It's
Okay. All right, so it sounds like on the first part of the bill, it sounds like there is consensus on some language that makes everyone's okay with. And
I'll go ahead and I'll draft that as an amendment that we can vote on the next time we're together. Is that?
yeah, that sounds perfect. So
Thank you for that. Oh, can I
guess
move on to the
this? Please go ahead.
I'm sorry. Can I move on to the second part of the bill? Okay. The second part of the bill, you may recall, is related to late fees. Now, it's my understanding that what I was doing in this section is aligning this late fee that the other places in statute or regulation that reference late fees reference them as a cap that then the commission or the utility or whatever the body is has the ability to set late fees up to that point, but doesn't require late fees to be set at a certain amount. So it had been my attempt to align this section with the other sections in state law or state regulations, the COMAR. So two things came up here, and I'll let WSSC raise for themselves their perspective on this. But one is that, well, let me talk about the part that I think is the one that requires the conversation. So I believe it's WSSC's position that the other sections in COMAR also require a late fee. I sent out, and again, I'm not sure if folks have received this, but I can read it. I sent out the section of COMAR. My apologies. Now I'm just finding this. So this is each gas, and electric or telephone company using late payment charge provisions, policies, or practices for residential customers and residential cooperatives may be authorized to apply to bills not paid within 20 days after the date of rendition up to 1.5% of the bill, and at the end of the first nominal billing interval after that, an additional charge to be made equal to 1.5% of the portion of the original amount. So I can, this is COMAR 20.30.03.01. I had sent it in, Rebecca sent it in an email to folks if folks want to be looking at it. I interpret it as a cap. And it's my intention to just align our reference to the WSSC language as a cap as well. I think WSSC interprets it differently. I mean, they can weigh in on that. So it is my goal to keep it at striking up to. Now, in addition to that, WSSC has proposed, if you have their language in front of you, an additional putting into statute that they can waive late fees as part of their financial assistance program, which they currently do right now. So this would just be codifying what they currently do. I am in agreement with that. I have no problem codifying their ability to waive the late fees or reduce late fees as part of financial assistance. But in addition to that, I think it's still appropriate to strike the up to part, making the 5% a cap rather than a requirement.
So, so you're saying you would like to keep up to in the bill so that it becomes a cap?
That's my proposal. And again, I think just from a work session perspective, I'm open to the perspectives of others on the committee, but that I would, based on the proposal from WSSC, I would say we would accept the first part of codifying the financial assistance language, but keeping the cap in, which is contrary to their second proposal.
So the sponsor and WSSC are in agreement about adding the language 3, financial assistance may include the waiver or reduction of fees, including late fees, which sort of codifies what is already the practice. And I guess the point of disagreement between WSSC and the sponsor is whether or not to strike the words up to that are in the bill. So just looking at the COMAR, I'm reading the last sentence of that COMAR. It says the total of the charges should not exceed 5% of the original unpaid amount. So I'm reading that also as up to, based on that last sentence as well. So WSSC, would you like to give us your perspective on whether up to should stay or whether that should be struck in the bill?
Excuse me, absolutely. Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this legislation again. We have been working with the delegate. I'm sorry, my printer is going off. We have been working with the delegate on this, and our concern remains up to gives a lot of flexibility, but again, the commissioners have not asked for that flexibility. Our concern is that there could be undue influence to force us to change the late fee percentage. when we talk about what's in COMAR right now, we're talking about, again, for telephone, gas, and electric. Looking at other water utilities, it's apples to oranges what the attempt is. We were asked by some of the feedback we received from delegates, not only in the Montgomery County delegation, but also some of the Prince George's County members, and along with the Montgomery County executive, was to put an amendment in that if we have up to 5%, that we would limit it or identify the population who would benefit from it. We still have in place some other, through our regulations, to work with our existing customers to waive the late fee once every 12 months. And again, we have the late fee as a deterrent, and that's all we have at WSSC Water. Unlike when we say the gas, electric, and telephone companies who, if there's a past due amount, it could be attached to the person through some type of credit mechanism. We don't have any point of recovery. So this is our attempt at a deterrent. It hasn't not been touched since 1971. I know that the bill sponsor mentioned that before. And then I think that's important to note that our commissioners don't want anything that's exorbitant or anything that will, be, again, a hindrance to someone making a payment. Is merely a deterrent. So we think that the medium between what Delegate Charkoudian is looking for and what we think would be appropriate, and not force other ratepayers to bear the cost or force undue influence to, if someone calls and says, oh, I want this person's late fee percentage to be reduced or eliminated. It provides that coverage, and it provides a population with whom we've identified who would need and benefit from it the most.
All right. So what I'm hearing, your argument is that if we were to add the language of up to 5%, then there'll be pressure on WSSC to reduce the late fee in a way that you all don't want to. Is that a good
That's part of it.
representation of what you said?
Yeah, that's part of it. But also, again, just trying to be fair when we look at who would benefit or who would we lower the late fee for. If we can identify a group by saying this, the customers who are in our customer assistance program, those are the people who would benefit from this. It makes it very specific. It's not arbitrary. It's very specific as to who would benefit from that.
Okay. But would you agree that the saying up to just gives all the flexibility to WSSC, doesn't require you to do anything differently? It would just allow you to, if you wanted to in the future, to say we want to start charging a late fee of 4.9%. It gives you that flexibility, but doesn't require you to do anything. Is that accurate?
That is a fair, I know that's the intent, and it's fair that we would adopt the regulations to make sure that, however we wanted to distribute. I understand the intent behind that. Unfortunately, our concern remains that it will be de facto, we have to do something because someone is telling us to or pressuring us to. So if we have it codified and it's very specific as to who we could do it for and how it can be done, that would alleviate some of the pressure that we could potentially run into.
Delegate Fraser Hidalgo.
Yeah, to your point, who are you worried about that would be pressuring you? Is it? I'll let you answer that. Who are you worried about that's going to be providing undue pressure?
We could reasonably get political pressure for that. Remember, we don't we don't create our own or approve our own budget. So we're not, the type of body who says this is our budget. Our commissioners approved it, it's good to go. We still rely on both county councils to do so. We, work with legislators across the spectrum. So that could be a potential case. And it's an extreme case. And I know that's something we don't necessarily anticipate. We can have community pressure. We just don't know where it would come from. But whatever it is, we want to make sure that whatever decision or regulations we would put out are not arbitrary. And we don't want to be accused of creating regulations that are arbitrary, benefiting one group over another, and kind of creating a customer class system, which we don't have. and could be easily, we can be sued over. So we just want to be very clear as to who would benefit from any changes in the late fees.
Okay, thank you.
Bill sponsor. Bill sponsor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may, I think what you're saying is that you want it to be 5%, but you want us to make that decision for you. And I think what we're saying is we think that in any given year, looking at the budget, looking at all of the different things that ought to be considered in a budget, in information that about what motivates people to pay their bills, in balancing all of those things, you would make that decision. And if you think it's 5%, I would back up your decision that it's 5%. But I just think that it's appropriate, given that you have an entire rate setting process, considers rates, considers usage. You have a system in place for financial assistance, and a piece of that rate setting process is determining what a late fee is. And that might get considered every 5 years and reestablished at 5% or established at something else. And it seems to me that you want it to be 5%, but you don't want to have to be accountable for that decision. So you want us to keep that decision in law rather than establish the cap, which is what we have for every other utility, rather than establish a cap and say, we trust you to consider all the things that you consider in all the rate making and to do this, in the right way.
That's absolutely not what I'm saying. And I find that to be a bit of an unfair characteristic. What we're trying to do, and we do undergo a very extensive rate setting process, and we look at, what it is, what our late fee percentage is, which our cost of, what is the best way to deter, which is why we haven't aligned ourselves with other water utilities who are doing the 10%. So we're not, that's not what we're saying. We're just asking for it to be narrowed down so that it's not a matter of can we respond to a question or can we make the decision based on the information that we have. It's a matter of, instead of saying, okay, or being accused of making an arbitrary decision, while you say you back us up, what if it comes a time where you don't, or someone says, well, you all should have done something this way. And we're looking and saying, this is the best, this is what we have. We continued the process to the best of our ability, but we can't choose this group or this group or this group. We're looking at, helping, like I said, a very narrow group in terms of our most vulnerable people. So that's what our concern is.
Delegate Frazier Hidalgo, and then Delegate Lukey.
What's the current rate?
For late fees, 5%.
Yes.
5%. And remember, whereas, COMAR is segmented out for those who pay under the telephone, gas, and other energy utilities, they are monthly. Generally, we're quarterly.
Okay.
Delegate Lukey.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I have a question, and it's maybe precedes the details of this discussion. But when this bill came up in the hearing, I wondered if it had a single subject issue, given that the two provisions of the bill are affecting very different issues. I don't know if the subcommittee counsel might be able to answer that, or
I think the bill sponsor can answer that question.
okay.
Yeah, we looked into that, and it's okay as it is right now.
It is.
It doesn't violate the single subject rule right now.
Okay.
I'm sorry, bill sponsor, according to who?
The Attorney General?
Great. I think that's what the Delegate Lukey might have been looking for.
Sorry, yes.
All right. Thank you.
Can I just clarify, Delegate Frazier Hidalgo, it's 5% because the law says it has to be 5%. I just want to make sure that.
I understand.
Oh,
Thank you.
okay. Right. So they couldn't set it at something else yet, although if we were to change this, they could.
I understand. Thank you.
So I have a question. So Karen, you said that the electric, gas, and telephone utilities bill monthly, whereas WSSC bills quarterly. So suppose 2 years from now or 3 years from now, WSSC switches to monthly billing. If we were to give you this flexibility of up to 5%, wouldn't that give you the flexibility to adjust that rate to a different percentage that's more appropriate for a monthly billed customer as opposed to a quarterly billed customer.
And that's something we can discuss if we ever get monthly billing. Unfortunately, that project is on hold. So it would be probably more appropriate to discuss then, because we will be able to do better modeling, rate modeling based on what we would have.
All right, Chair Corman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a little confused by the approach on this, that it would be arbitrary. First of all, to me, the 5% is arbitrary because I wasn't there in the 70s when they told us why that, told our predecessors why that number made sense. But it seems that all these assistance programs have great potential to be arbitrary. Who's in them, who's not in them, how do they get cut off? This is the non-arbitrary figure. This is the sort of broad baseline that hits everybody equally. But wouldn't the answer be, if you started feeling pressure to, I think it would have to be universally lower the rate. I don't think it would be for an individual group or person. I think it would be, saying that the rate is going to go down. To say to whoever's applying that pressure, who you were explaining in response to Delegate Fraser-Hidalgo's question, we don't need to lower the sort of headline rate because we have all these other programs. So if you found that it wasn't appropriate, it's not that, we would just take your word for it, but you would have the explanation that, yes, we understand that right now, this is a hypothetical, right now, because of the pandemic and the economic situation, not everyone can pay. That's why we have this customer assistance program to lower or eliminate the late fee for people who are in that group, so that you don't have to worry about going below the 5%. But maybe at another time, it would be appropriate to say for everybody, the late fee should be lower. I mean, that to me, the arbitrary is sort of the current system, but maybe I'm missing something.
That could be a
respond to that?
point. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, you're on
Want to
mute.
respond to that? Go ahead.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from, Delegate Corman. I understand the discussion about, you all will have the flexibility, but I think that right now, and I wasn't around when they set this fee either. So I think that comparatively speaking, the fee was set in a way, again, just to be nominal in a sense of being of a deterrent. So, I understand your point. I guess our point remains that we just want to be able to articulate who would benefit. And that's, again, the feedback that we got from.
Right. But
other
if you
members.
lower the rate,
I see Guy raising his hand. Maybe he can articulate better than I can.
sorry, but let me just, sorry, Guy, if I could reclaim my time for just a second. Everyone would benefit if you lowered the fee. I mean, that's the point of lowering the percentage, right? That would be what applies to everybody. Then within that, you might make arbitrary changes, and maybe those make sense. Maybe people who are lower income or unemployed or are behind on their bills by a certain amount of quarters, it makes sense to alter the number for them. But the number that Delegate Charkoudian's bill is getting at, I think, is the non-arbitrary number. It's the number that applies to everybody. Guy, what am I missing?
So for as it stands right now under current WSSC regulations, and I apologize if this has already been stated. If a customer, all customers who are assessed a late fee can call and request that their late fee be waived once every 12 months, all customers. So that's whether you're in cap or you're non-cap customer. The county executive, so that, in my opinion, would address the issue of, we want to not reduce the headline fee of 5%. Because if we determine and delineate a criteria for which that fee can be waived again or be lowered, in the case of a cap customer where there's established criteria for meeting that threshold or that customer, which is set by, we use the OHEAP standards, that would that alleviates that issue of having to lower that fee. Right now, forgive me if you are in a cap customer, I apologize. But we, as a normal, outside of a normal, I shouldn't say normal, a non-cap customer, I can call today and get my late fee waived once. You should be, and that's your forgiveness. It happens with credit cards. It happens in other things like that. I don't want to go too far in the weeds on that. The most vulnerable customers are our cap customers. we, as articulated by the county executive who wanted to see specific criteria, put this language forward to identify those most vulnerable customers that we could waive that fee or lower that fee to 1, 2, 3, 4, or 0. That's what we did. We heard his comments, and that's why we made this delineation to the cap customers. I would like to point out also that while this rate was put in the 1970s, the rate in Comar has been in effect since 1995. I don't think anybody was in office at that time either. And I just want to point out that there's these rates are set, and they're pretty much set. Our commissioners who have been tasked with the governance of the commission have not asked for an adjustment of this rate, and we would respectfully request that the body accept our amendment and strike that up too.
Delegate Fraser Hidalgo, and then Delegate Lukey.
Okay, so I think that Delegate Corman brought up a lot of very, very strong points. Given the fact that we are in the middle of a pandemic of which we haven't seen in 102 years, and people are having trouble feeding their families, people are having trouble keeping their jobs, people are having trouble keeping roofs over their head, let alone water in their pipes. It seems to me that logic dictates that having the flexibility would be, I just don't, I'm having a real trouble understanding the argument for the inverse of this. It seems to me logic dictates you would want to have that flexibility. So it's less of a question and more of a statement. That's where I am. Thank you.
May I respond, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
So to that point, we when the pandemic first came in March, 4 days prior to the declaration of the executive order from the governor, WSSC suspended late fee assessments and our shutoffs. We put a moratorium on shutoffs. That moratorium has been lifted since September 1st. WSSC continues with their moratorium. I'm sorry, on the regulated utilities that was lifted on September 1st with the executive order. WSSC continues our moratorium, and we are not assessing late fees right now, and we continue to do that. We testified before your committee earlier in, I believe it was October, about the delinquent accounts and the amount of delinquent amounts that are accumulating. That number is up to about $63 million. It's still over 94,000. I think it's 97,000 to be exact. I don't know the exact numbers right off the top of my head. I apologize. Accounts that are 30 days past due. So we hear and we sympathize with our customers who are having troubles paying their bills. And we took action. We're not assessing late fees, and we still have a moratorium on shutoffs.
Guy, I can't thank you enough. I think that's wonderful. I do. I think that's great. And it seems to me that having additional flexibility would give you even more. So, but again, thank you for what you're doing. Thanks.
Delegate Lukey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my argument would be I actually like WSSC's proposal here. And I assume, and Delegate Charkoudian, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I assume your intent here was to try to help out people who, may be struggling, right? But, there are, I think, people who don't pay their bills because they're struggling, and there are people that don't pay their bills just because they don't pay their bills. And I think, I have a lot more sympathy for a low income person than I do for somebody who can afford it but just doesn't, right? I think late fees exist for a reason. They exist to incent people to pay on time. I think that's a reasonable practice. So, I mean, doesn't WSSC's proposal not get at what you wanted in terms of allowing room for late fee relief for lower income folks?
Can I respond to that?
I was asking.
That was a question to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think what I was looking for, I started looking at this issue in the context of emergency assistance and what was available and so on. But then in looking at broader issues about rate setting, I think there is a regular process that considers a budget, that considers expenses, that considers inputs and outputs, it considers all of those things and incentivizing people to pay and what's fair and all of those things. And in my mind, it made sense that setting late fees ought to be done by the commission in the context of all of the rate setting processes. For everybody, both to consider people who struggle with their bill. There's people who pay and people who don't pay and people who pay late, and some of them because they struggle and some of them potentially because they lost it in the pile of papers on their desk, and potentially for other reasons. I guess I've been surprised by the conversation, honestly, because everywhere else that I've seen late fees in statute, it's a cap. And so I've been confused by this conversation, and WSSC has said to me, no, it's not a cap. And then we went and we found it and it was a cap. So I'm not sure that I understand what the concern is about having that cap. I'm not opposed to a 5% late fee as a 5% late fee. It just seems to me that it's the duty of the legislature to set caps on things, and the duty of the bodies that are responsible for balancing their budgets to figure out within those budgetary processes how to set rates, how to set fees, how to set late fees, how to set monthly versus quarterly billing, those kinds of things. So it seems that it's consistent with that to say we would set a cap, you all figure out within that cap what the right thing to do is.
I mean, ideally, that is, I think, the way it should work. But I think WSSC is different than a lot of other utilities in that, frankly, there has been a history at times of undue political pressure put on WSSC by authorities, frankly, in both counties, that don't have to do with the sort of objective decision-making process you're describing, right? And that's where I think, if I'm reading between the lines and saying what WSSC won't say, I think that's where their fee is coming, or their fear is coming from, and I get that, right? Because they're different than BGE, right? The BGE doesn't have that same kind of pressure. So I mean, I guess what if the goal really is, let's make sure, given what we've learned during the pandemic and given the disproportionate impacts of the pandemic on lower income folks, let's make sure that lower income folks aren't being hit hard, if they have trouble paying their water bill on time. Doesn't WSSC's suggestions solve that problem or address that problem in some way without maybe addressing the rest of it?
Yeah, I don't oppose the suggestion they have. I think that the suggestion they have puts into code what they're currently doing. So it doesn't actually change anything. That doesn't. And as I said, this doesn't come out of it came out of the pandemic just because I started looking at fees and so on during the pandemic. But certainly it would be a permanent change. And I do think that there's something to be said for, we talk a lot about low income folks struggling to pay their bills as though it's there's a particular cliff, and there is a cliff for some people, but it's also a spectrum. And there's people who struggle, who may or may not. I mean, there's people who the bills add up, right? And part of what we've seen is, there's people who struggle that may or may not kind of fall into the clearly I'm struggling to pay my bill and I just can't, I just need to, access all the various financial systems. There's that. And then there's people who are, kind of making it, getting by, and fees and late fees do affect them over time, when you add it up, the debts and so on. So there's a broader issue about affordability, I think, beyond just folks who clearly fall into the financial assistance programs. But so that's, I guess it's a broader sort of consistency thinking about how do we set, what's right for statute, what's right for to be done in within the bodies, within the utilities. I guess that's kind of my thinking on it.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. Can I ask?
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yes, Delegate Lukey.
Okay, thank you, Guy. Can I ask you if WSSC? I assume the reason these fees exist is to encourage people to pay on time.
Correct.
If WSSC were to start having significant trouble getting, particularly large customers to pay on time, how would the agency deal with that?
Right now, if we have large customers, so back all the way up, we had one portion of the amendment that you don't see is we requested, and we have in the past, requested lien authority on a property. Not to allow, that would not allow us to take possession of, or take someone to tax sale. But the answer to the question is, we don't have any ability to collect. We have an obligation to bring the service to anyone that's set up to that system. If they don't pay, the only thing we can do is shut them off. And as of right now, we don't shut them off. We charge a late fee. We do not collect social security numbers, so we don't send them, we can't send them to collections and things of that nature. So that's our only deterrent, to have someone, or bring the hammer to have someone pay their bill.
So you either shut them off or you just absorb the loss, and then I assume that impacts rates.
It gets spread out across the rate base. So just to elaborate on that $63 million that you heard about in October, and that was it has since grown since today. That would have been, if I remember the number, it was a greater than 8% rate increase that we'd have to assess to everyone in the system to recover those lost fees, or those lost revenues.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your patience.
All right, Chair Corman.
Yeah, I think the challenge is figuring out where that number is before you hit that tipping point where people just aren't paying because they don't feel like paying, and you've lost the deterrent effect. And I just don't think I don't think anybody on this call, least of all me, can tell you exactly where that number is. Delegate Charkoudian, I did just want to go back to a point you made, and I unusually I'm going to take the position of defending the commission. Yes, their amendment would not change how things are currently done, but neither would your bill, because they could maintain the 5%. As is. So I think since we're not going to be able to vote today anyway, I would just suggest you keep talking to them to see, because you guys don't seem that far apart. So I would just suggest a continued conversation, because I think a consensus product is better than a non-consensus product to the extent possible.
All right, Montgomery County, do you have anything to add to this conversation?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you have our position statement, both the county executive and county council. County council did not take a position. County executive supported the bill with an amendment clarifying the circumstances under which WSSC could reduce the fee. And the county executive, I'll just say that when we first looked at the bill, we did assume, as Delegate Lukey assumed, that the intent was to allow WSSC to reduce the fee in circumstances where there was need, however you might define need, low income, unemployment, et cetera. And so that's why in the position statement, you have the county executive saying he supports the bill with an amendment that will clarify the circumstances. And that would have been his intent, that the circumstances would relate to need and circumstances of a customer. I've had great communications with all the WSSC staff, back and forth with Delegate Charkoudian, to learn that indeed there are two separate issues here. That Delegate Charkoudian intended that WSSC have the authority on an annual basis as a part of the budget preparation and rate setting process, that WSSC have the authority to set a reduced fee for every customer uniformly across the whole sanitary district. And frankly, we never discussed that issue with the county executive because we didn't understand that to be the intent. The county executive would certainly support the WSSC amendment because it does speak to his concern in terms of if there's going to be a reduction in fee, it would relate to need. It wouldn't have to be the cap eligibility criteria, but it would be criteria that a number of delegates here have touched on related to need, income, unemployment, et cetera. So as I said, county executive didn't speak to the issue of the annual reduced fee and whether WSSC should have that discretion.
All right, Delegate Dumais, do you have any thoughts you want to add?
I don't think you want my thoughts.
Okay.
Honestly, if it could be worked out with everybody, it would be better. I mean, I don't understand how, if Comar says not exceeding, why the statute is going to say something different. I appreciate WSSC's position, but I just don't think this is that big of a deal. That's
Right.
my comment that I didn't think you'd like, but.
Thank you. Delegate Charkoudian, did you, anything else to add?
No.
All right, so it's, what I'm hearing is consensus around the WSSC amendment addressing the CAP program is fine. No one objects to that. And regarding up to, does it stay or does it go? I mean, it sounds like a majority of this committee is in favor of that language staying in, but there is an opportunity for the bill sponsor and WSSC to keep talking before we have a final meeting. So
There appears to be a little bit of a clash as to whether that should stay or whether it should go.
right, I would say the majority of us seem to be,
I got it, Delegate Fraser Hidalgo.
yeah. Got it. I'm a little slow. So yeah, so we're going to poll the committee members to find another date to meet. So that'll give you a little more time to discuss, and we can come to a decision on whether that language stays or goes. So with that, is there anything else for the good of the order? Okay, hearing none. Thank you all very much. Have a very happy holiday. Check your email, and we will reach out to find another date to hopefully meet for January 7th and get this